Welcome to our podcast, and this week at London Visited, we go to Leicester Square to tell you all about this iconic part of London. My name's Steve, and each week I'll bring to you the facts, history and information about different parts of this great capital. If you've been to London, are planning on visiting, live here or just love London from afar, then this is the podcast for you. Don't forget to visit our YouTube channel, London Visited, to see videos covering this place and so many others across London. And now to this week's podcast on Leicester Square. Leicester Square is in the city of Westminster, just north of Trafalgar Square, east of Piccadilly Circus, west of Covent Garden and south of Cambridge Circus. So you could say it's right in the middle of everywhere. The nearest underground is Leicester Square Tube Station, which opened in 1906, and a lot of buses run nearby on the Charing Cross Road. Leicester Square has also been the name for the immediate surrounding area, roughly corresponding with Coventry Street, Cranbourne Street and Charing Cross Road, plus St Martin's Street, which is also just around the corner from St Martin's in the Field. The land where Leicester Square now lies once belonged to the abbot and convent of Westminster Abbey and the Beaumont family. In 1536, Henry VIII took control of 3 acres of land around the square, with the remaining 4 acres having been transferred to the king the following year. The square is named after Robert Sidney, 2nd Earl of Leicester, who purchased this land in 1630. By 1635, he had built himself a large house, Leicester House, at the northern end. The area in front of the house was then enclosed, depriving inhabitants of St Martin in the Fields parish of their right to use the previously common land. The parishioners appealed to King Charles I, and he appointed 3 members of the Privy Council to arbitrate. Lord Leicester was ordered to keep part of his land, thereafter known as Leicester Fields, and later as Leicester Square, open for the parishioners. The square was laid out to the south of Leicester House and developed in the 1670s. The area was originally entirely residential, with properties laid out in a similar style to nearby Pall Mall. In 1687, the northern part of the square became part of the new parish of St Anne, Soho. The 7th Earl of Leicester took ownership of the property in 1728, and it was briefly the residence of Frederick, Prince of Wales, from 1742 until Leicester's death in the following year. The poet, Matthew Prior, lived at what is now number 21, around 1700, and artist William Hogarth resided at number 30, between 1733 and 1764, where he produced some of his best-known works, including Gin Lane. The magistrate, Thomas de Vale, later to found Bow Street Magistrates Court, lived at number 40 between 1729 and 1737. This location is now the Odeon West End. The painter Joshua Reynolds lived at number 47 from 1760 until his death in 1792. This location is now Farnham House, once the Automobile Association head office. At the end of the 17th century, Lord Leicester's heir, Philip Sidney, 3rd Earl of Leicester, permitted a small amount of retail development in booths along the front of Leicester House. A statue of King George I was built on the square in 1760 following the coronation of his great-grandson, George III. The square remained fashionable throughout most of the 18th century, with notable residents including the architect James Stewart at number 35 from 1766 to 1788, and the painter John Singleton Copley at number 28 from 1776 to 1783. Leicester House was intermittently inhabited during the mid-18th century, and was finally sold to the naturalist Ashton Lever in 1775. Lever turned the house into a museum with a significant amount of natural history objects. In turn, the square began to serve as a venue for popular entertainments. Brothels began to appear around Leicester Square during the turn of the century, and visitors could pay to watch the severed heads of traitors executed at Temple Bar through a telescope. Leicester House became a home of a museum of natural curiosities called the Holo-Fisconian in the 1780s. It was demolished in 1791 due to rising debts following the extinction of the Leicester peerage, and was replaced by Leicester Place. That, in turn, was converted into a church in 1865 and is now the site of the Prince Charles Cinema. In 1790, a new Royal Opera House was proposed to be built in Leicester Square. The scheme was led by the Prince of Wales, Francis Russell, 5th Duke of Bedford, and James Cecil, 1st Marquis of Salisbury, and aimed to re-establish London as a centre for Italian opera and ballet, with an opera house to rival those in mainland Europe. The opera house was never built, as the royal patent needed at that time to license a theatre was refused. The plans for the original design are preserved in the St John Soanes Museum, while a 1790 painting by William Hodges, which displays the finished design, belongs to the Museum of London. By the 19th century, Leicester Square was known as an entertainment venue, with many amusements peculiar to the era, including Wilde's Great Globe, which was built for the Great Exhibition of 1851 and housed a giant-scale map of the Earth. The construction of New Coventry Street made it easier for traffic to access the square, resulting in private residences being replaced by shops, museums and exhibition centres. Savile House at number 5 to 6, built in 1683 for Thomas Bruce, 2nd Earl of Aylesbury, had become a museum by this time and was ultimately destroyed by fire in 1865 and was rebuilt as the Empire Theatre. Several foreign-owned hotels were established around the square, making it popular with visitors to London. Brunet's Hotel at number 25 was opened by Louis Brunet in 1800, later expanding to numbers 24 and 26 during the following decade. It was bought by Francis Genet in 1815, known as Genet's Hotel. The Hotel Cerbonnaire et de Provence opened at 17 to 18 in 1845 as the Hotel de Provence and renamed in 1869. It closed in 1919 and became a public house, the Cavell at number 20, at the south-east of the square, opened in 1864. It was badly damaged in World War II, but subsequently restored. The Alhambra Theatre was built in 1854 on the east side of the square, dominating the site. It temporarily closed 2 years later when the original owner, Edward Clark, became bankrupt, but then reopened in 1858 as the Alhambra Palace. It enjoyed a surge in popularity after Queen Victoria and family came to see Black Eagle, the Horse of Beauty. It burned down in 1882 but reopened the following year. In the early 20th century, the theatre became a popular venue for ballet. It was demolished in 1936 and replaced by the Odeon Cinema. The Empire Theatre of Varieties opened in 1881 on the former site of Savile House, but had a troubled start, closing for a time until the end of the decade. The theatre had a notorious reputation for high-class prostitutes frequenting the theatre, and in 1894 the London County Council ordered the promenade on the upper balcony to be remodelled. A young Winston Churchill, then a cadet at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, helped destroy canvas screens that had been erected to prevent access to the balcony. The theatre closed in 1927 to be replaced by the Empire Cinema. During the winter of discontent, where the incumbent Labour Party struggled to meet demands of trade unions and a shrinking economy, refuse collectors went on strike in January 1979. Leicester Square was turned into a de facto dump, earning it the nickname of Leicester Square. In the 1980s, the square was pedestrianised, cutting off all vehicular traffic. Access to the square for goods and deliveries is now controlled by specially designated marshals. Hi there, and thanks so much for listening to this podcast on the history of London. And if you're enjoying this, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up on YouTube. Now, if you want to get more involved with London Visited, don't forget you can join us as a member by going to patreon.com/London Visited with so many different benefits. Or you could purchase a 4K photograph of London from our website, londonvisited.co.uk, both of which support us and keep the channel going. Once again, thanks for listening. And now, back to the podcast. By the end of the 21st century, Westminster City Council were concerned that the square was too dangerous at night and wanted to demolish sections of it to encourage the growth of theatres and cinemas, and reduce popularity of nightclubs. In 2010, a major redevelopment of Leicester Square took place as part of the Great Outdoors scheme proposed by the Mayor of London, the then Boris Johnson. The improvements included 12,000 square metres of granite paving and a water feature surrounding the Shakespeare statue. The square reopened in May 2012 after 17 months' work at a total cost of £15.3 million. The Greater London Authority said the refurbishments would accommodate more than 1,000 new jobs. The reopening coincided with the 2012 Summer Olympics later that year. In the middle of the square is a small park that was originally available for common use on Lammas Day, the 12th of August, such as washing clothes and herding cattle. The Earl of Leicester was obliged to preserve these grounds, which was separated from the rest of the square with railings. In 1808, the garden was sold by the Leicester estate to Charles Elms for £210, equivalent to £16,500 in 2020, who neglected to maintain it. Ownership changed hands a number of times during the first half of the 19th century, including Robert Barron following Elms's death in 1822, John Enderick in 1834, and Hyam Hyams and Edward Moxey in 1839. Little maintenance was done, and the garden deteriorated to the point of severe dilapidation. In 1848, the land was subject to the significant legal case of Tolk versus Moxey. The plot's previous owner, Moxey, had agreed upon a covenant not to erect buildings, but the law would not allow buyers, who were not privy to the initial contract, to be bound by subsequent promises. The judge, Lord Cottingham, decided that future owners of land could be bound by promises to abstain from activity, subject to the doctrine of notice, actual or constructive. Otherwise, a buyer could resell land to himself to undermine an initial promise. James Wilde bought the assets of the garden from the Tolk and Moxey's death estates in 1849 to erect the Great Globe, though buried the statue of George I under 12 feet of earth with the globe stuck on top. The statue was uncovered following the globe's demise, but by 1866 it had deteriorated due to vandalism and was sold for £16. Arguments continued about the fate of the garden, with Charles Tolk's heirs erecting a wooden hoarding around the property in 1873. These were quickly removed after the Master of the Rolls ordered that the land must be preserved for its original purpose. The garden was saved by the Member of Parliament Albert Grant, who purchased the park in 1874 for £11,060 and donated it to the Metropolitan Board of Works. The title deed for the square passed to the succeeding public bodies and is now in the ownership of the City of Westminster. After purchase, the architect James Knowles redesigned the park. A statue of William Shakespeare, surrounded by dolphins, was constructed in the centre. The four corner gates of the park had one bust each of a former famous residents in the square: the scientist Sir Isaac Newton, Sir Joshua Reynolds, the first president of the Royal Academy, John Hunter, a pioneer of surgery, and William Hogarth, the painter. Ownership transferred to Westminster City Council in 1933. The most recent addition was a bronze statue of film star and director Charlie Chaplin, which was placed there in 1981. On the pavement were inscribed the distance in miles to several Commonwealth countries, including Canada, Kenya, and Jamaica. After the great outdoors refurbishment of the square, only the statue of Shakespeare still remains. Leicester Square is one of several places in the West End that puts on events relating to the Chinese New Year. The celebrations are organised by the London Chinatown Chinese Association and held on the first Sunday during the New Year period. Events include music, acrobatics and dancing. In 2015, the celebrations attracted more than 1,000 participants, becoming the largest of their kind in the UK. These included lion dances, a show of cultures of China and a drum show. A parade ran nearby through Charing Cross Road and Shaftesbury Avenue. The world's largest Lego store opened on 3 Swiss Court, Leicester Square, in November 2016. The opening was marked by unveiling a 6-metre 20-foot high model of Big Ben, made out of 200,000 Lego bricks, and is still visible in the window now. And if you go to our YouTube channel, London Visited, you'll find a video on there, on the Lego store. The main electrical substation for the West End is underneath the square. The electric cables to the substation are in a large tunnel ending at Leicester Square and originating in Wimbledon at Plough Lane, behind the former Wimbledon FC football ground, before which the cables are above ground. Leicester Square is one of a group of 3 on the British Monopoly Board, along with Coventry Street and Piccadilly. The board was set out by designers Victor Watson and Marge Phillips in order of the entertainment on a Saturday night, film at Leicester Square, meal in Coventry Street and hotel on Piccadilly. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed our in-depth look at the very popular Leicester Square. I also hope you've learned a lot about Leicester Square. Whatever podcast service you use to listen to us, please do subscribe to get updates on new shows, and also please leave us some feedback. Please also let me know any places you'd like us to feature in future podcasts through our website www.londonvisited.co.uk or by emailing me directly on londonvisited@gmail.com, or you can contact us on Twitter and Instagram @LondonVisited or Facebook on The London Visited. Thanks for listening. Really hope you enjoyed our podcast, and we'll see you very soon on the next one. Take care. Bye.